Hello, everyone. This is Kelly Boyles, your host for Arts and Crimes, the True Art, True Crime podcast, where we look at the duality of man. We reflect a mirror on society. I'm here with my co-hosts.
I'm Brandon.
That makes me Josh.
And welcome back, listeners. It's Arts and Crimes. We're here for it. I hope that goes well.
That didn't go well. Do your own one. I've given up. I'm a failure.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah, I thought it was great. Also, I feel like after 3 episodes, they should know that whose voice is whose.
I really embodied Josh, I thought.
Yeah.
That
means I'm Josh.
I was fooled.
Okay. So, yeah, welcome back, listeners. So today I feel like I'm real excited because I feel like you guys will like this better than the witches, because nobody dies in this one.
Oh, good.
So
Up top.
Today's episode we're going to talk about Andy Warhol. Do you guys know who that is?
I've heard the name.
He loves canned food. That is what I know about him.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is he the guy with the 4 color thingies next to each other, or is that somebody else?
Yeah, pop art. He does more than 4 generally, but that's kind of like the standard. Like when you think of pop art, it's those like 4 colored, like bright color kind of things. So Andy Warhol did like the Campbell's soup one, and it has small canvases.
Okay. I love that this is an art podcast, but it's a podcast. So you're like, imagine, if you will, a brightly colored picture with some cans on it.
Close
like
your
you
eyes.
have to describe the art.
Yeah, but don't close your eyes if you're driving anywhere.
Google Andy Warhol.
And
famous
like I feel
picture.
like everybody knows the Campbell soup one,
Yeah.
right? And then he is also really famous for like the Marilyn Monroe portrait. Because he did like screen printing or silk screening, I think it's technically called, and of like really famous artists or people, humans generally. Actually, he did some dogs too. Actually, later in his life.
Were they also celebrity dogs?
Well, I mean, they were his dogs.
I mean, they became celebrity dogs, right?
Yeah, he
True.
gave them the
Real
celebrity.
chicken and egg thing going on here with his paintings.
Yeah. But he is one of the like biggest names in pop art. Mm-hmm. I actually really like Roy Lichtenstein as well. He does the like, if you imagine those paintings that are like the very graphic comic strip style with like the dots on it. Mm-hmm. That's Lichtenstein.
It's called pointillism.
Actually, it has a different name.
Halftone?
Dang it.
No, it's not halftone either. Yeah, they're called Ben-Day dots.
Ben-Day dots.
Yeah, like Ben-Day dots. And they're specifically the dots used in those graphic comic book style.
Did he name them?
Maybe a guy named Ben Day did.
If you invent an art style, you should get to name it.
I feel like that's true. I feel like you get to. Although I don't know if it ever has been that way. But you should invent some art things and then name them after yourself.
Or, well, I already did. It's called Rococo. And I invented it and named it.
Rococo. And...
Or Rococo.
Rococo. Okay, anyways. So, yeah. This isn't Rococo. Dang it. Rococo.
It's already sweeping the nation. Rococo fever.
I almost said it again. You're the worst. Rococo.
Rococo.
Yeah, it's not Rococo art. It's pop art. And pop art, so to get you in the right time frame, we're going to be generally around the 1950s, 1960s. This is when this whole pop art and Andy Warhol thing went on. So what we're going to talk about, the reason we're talking about Andy Warhol is because there was an assassination attempt on him. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So he was a super controversial guy. So, and like surrounded by quite a few controversial people. So we're kind of going to go over like his life and story, end up there and culminate at the assassination attempt. All right. So Andy Warhol was born August 6th, 1928. I had a really hard time getting those numbers out of my mouth. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And already, here's what's really interesting about his birth date is we didn't actually know what his actual birth date was until the 90s.
Really?
Yeah. And the reason is he constantly lied to people about it. Like he was like the Joker. He like told a different story every time somebody asked about his childhood.
Like from his time as a child, like this started.
Like as soon as he got any kind of fame and people cared about when he was born, he lied about it.
Huh.
Like consistently. Which I don't know why he did. But he did very consistently, so much so that we really didn't know until after the 90s. Or in the 90s when we were like, okay, this was actually when he was born, and this is actually how old he was during these time frames in his life.
Okay, I think everyone should have a real life running gag. So his real life running gag is always making up his birthday.
His birthday. Mm-hmm.
My real life running gag is not as fun, but anytime Michaela and I see a llama or an alpaca, I will always insist it's the other one. So if we see a llama farm, I'll be like, I'm pretty sure they're alpacas, you know? And if we see a bunch of alpacas, I'm like, those are definitely llamas. I don't know when this started or why I do it.
I've definitely heard you do it.
Yeah. So everyone needs a meaningless, harmless running gag in their life, I feel like.
I think that's fantastic. Everybody can work on that's your assignment to go home, figure out your meaningless, harmless running.
In the comments, tell us what you're going to do for your running gag.
Is mine, yeah, you do?
Yeah, maybe, because you do say that.
Is that a catchphrase, though?
Oh man, it could be my catchphrase.
Yeah.
There it is.
We found it.
Yeah. You've
and
been
my
searching.
name's Brandon. Yeah, you do.
I'll just snippet that to the beginning.
That's going to end up on a Shock Jocks, like, soundboard. We're here with 107.9. Yeah, you do.
All right. One fact in, and we're already on a roll.
It's going to be a 4-hour podcast. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll let you continue.
Okay. So he was born to Russian immigrants. It was Andrei Warhol and his mom Julia Warhola. So that, I don't know if you know, that's his actual last name is Warhola. And he had 2 older brothers, Paul and John, and that's the family. They grew up as devout Byzantine Catholics, and it was a major part of his like life throughout, which is interesting when you hear some of the like behaviors that he
even as an adult.
He like still held to it as an adult.
Interesting.
And he like is a man full of contradictions because he will say so many things where he's like, I hold to this, and like he goes to church, but he also like is not spiritual and doesn't do like follow the religious restrictions. So he just sort of is that way his whole life, like as a kid. So actually, like it's kind of started after about the age 8. He contracted cholera, or it's also known as Saint Vitus or Vitus dance. And it's a rare and often fatal disease of the nervous system. It also causes skin pigmentation blotches. And so he was like super self-conscious of the pigmentation blotching that he had his whole life. And he included it as a subject matter in some of his art. But at that age, at 8 years old, he was bedridden for a long time. And he ended up having to stay home. And so he would like stay home and would sleep in the bed with his mom because he was so sickly. And he would cut out paper dolls and like dress paper dolls. And like she introduced him to drawing at that age because she was a talented drawer artist as well. I hate
Using
that
your
word.
technical terms.
Yeah, drawer. I almost said she was really good at doodles, and then I was like, that's not giving it justice.
That's offensive.
That's offensive. So she was a talented artist, so she kind of introduced him to drawing and sketching and all that kind of stuff. And he absolutely took to the arts. And so when he was in elementary school, he joined the Carnegie Institute, which is now the Carnegie Museum of Art, because they had free classes for like elementary school kids. And so he was like, in this time that he was sort of at home with his mom, and throughout his childhood, his mom really pushed the idea of like being an individual, that it was really good to be different, that it was good to stand out, like you didn't need to follow any of the like society rules kind of thing. And so he really, really stuck to that for his whole life. And excelled in his like drawing classes in school. And then when he was 14, his father died from a jaundiced liver. And Andy was so upset by his death that he couldn't go to the funeral. So he like hid under his bed through the entire wake, and just like couldn't talk about it, which like going through the whole thing, where I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, but it's interesting because like very much so later in his life, when his mom passes away, he also didn't go to her funeral then. And she like lived like in his studio, like he had a room for her that he paid for her, like her whole life. She always lived with Andy, except for right there at the end. She had to go to like a nursing home, and he wouldn't visit her in the nursing home, and he wouldn't see her. Like he didn't go to the funeral. So I think there's like a lot of themes where I think he really is not okay with death for some reason. But at the same time, he does a lot of really like makes a lot of really grotesque comments about death, and like makes light of it. Also, again, I'm skipping forward a little bit. But like later in his life, he's quoted as after he knew somebody that took a bunch of LSD, like danced around for a bit, and then jumped out of a window and died. And his comment to that was he was really sad that he wasn't there to film it. And so like, it's, you know, that's like a big contradiction where he like couldn't even go to these funerals, but he wanted to like film this grotesque death. So
maybe he didn't really like the guy that jumped out the window.
I mean, I have no idea, really. But he also said that about his, like, an ex that he dated.
That also would make sense, that you'd want to film your ex jumping out a window.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like contradictory, but it makes sense. If he is someone who can't really handle death, then joking about it is often a way that people deal with stuff like that. So, like, I bet if he had the opportunity to actually be there and film it, he would have just been a mess.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, we obviously can't call his bluff now. So anyways, at age 14, his father passed away. And in his father's will, because they, like, the family recognized his talent, his father left all of his savings to be spent on Andy's education, art education, which, like, if I was the brothers, I would feel like a little bummed.
Did he have brothers and sisters?
He had two brothers.
Right?
Okay.
Paul and John.
Paul and John, yeah.
Did they say that?
I did.
Who? Kelly did.
Yeah. Kelly said that. He had two brothers named Paul and John.
Yes, she did.
What was I doing?
Probably thinking of your next joke. I was listening, which makes me the boring one.
I'm over here sitting on my next finger and missing everything. And Brandon's like, yeah, it's interesting. Absorbing it all.
Yeah, so Paul and John.
Okay. That is hilarious. His dad was like, listen, I got one son that's worth anything, and the rest of y'all.
And it's all gone to him. But, like, there's nothing, like, I read nothing anywhere that the brothers were unhappy about this. Like, they were good brothers. They just were like, yeah.
Obviously, his dad bet on the right horse, because we're not here
talking about Paul or John.
Paul.
You literally forgot them in seconds.
Yeah.
So
that was part of the bit. It was.
That was genius.
It was intentional.
But they, like, the whole family was really supportive. During the time that, you know, Andy was at home and doing stuff, and, like, during his art career as a child. He learned photography, and he really enjoyed photography and filmography. So he does like photography and videography, I think is what it's called, throughout his whole life. But his brothers built him like a makeshift darkroom in their house so that he could develop his photos there. So like everybody had his back. So after he graduated from high school, he went on to go to college at the Carnegie Institute. And I was doing a bunch of research and listening to a bunch of stuff on this. And I thought it was really interesting because a lot of people, when they talked about Andy Warhol's like sketching abilities and like drafting abilities, when he would like draft stuff out later, and even in the school, they were like, he's not actually that great. He was like doing all this art stuff and like getting noticed, but apparently like not good at sketching and like doing basic drawings. And at one point he's almost kicked out of the school because he's doing so poorly. And he, it's said that he went like crying to the school, begging them to let him stay. And so they finally agreed to let him stay if he did remediation classes during the summer, and he had to like submit a portfolio of sketches or drawings at the end, to sort of like whether or not he would get to continue the next year, they had to be good enough. And so what he ended up doing was he felt that they just didn't understand his art. And so he mimicked the character style of an artist that they really liked already. Mm-hmm. And so he just mimicked it in sketches that he did of, because he was going out and doing deliveries with his brothers, and stuff like that, because he was still had to work through his whole college career. And so he would do sketches of their clients and people they had to do deliveries for, and he'd create these caricatures in this style from this other guy that was doing really well in the school. And he came back, and the school was like, oh, we actually really like these. You get to stay. and he got to stay. During his time in school, he joined like the drama department, and he was heavily involved in creating like films and that kind of stuff, as well as doing his different art classes. So anyways, he was like part of all of these clubs, and they would stage like crazy videos where they would like put on a play like out in the middle of like real life happening. And Andy Warhol was often the like a key player or a star in them, and he would play with the like gender expectations. Like he always was, you know, like dressing a little bit more effeminate, or he even has like some portraits later that he does of himself like in full drag. So he is kind of always pushing those limits, especially in college. That's kind of like where he was getting that start to sort of push all those boundaries and to step outside of these like social norms. And so he kind of took that with him after he graduated in 1949. So he got a fine arts degree. And originally, I also thought this was interesting. Originally, he went in to get an art education degree because he wanted to be a teacher. But during his time there, he switched to just getting a fine arts degree. And I was like, I think I did the opposite, because I got my fine arts. I actually like got my bachelor's of fine arts and then got my teaching certificate afterwards. And now my master's is in education. So I was like, I'm the anti-Warhol.
The anti-Andy?
Yeah, the anti-Andy. Ooh, that was good.
Catchphrase.
Zing. He graduates, and then he moves to New York. And in New York, he immediately gets a job for doing commercial advertising. He got a job at Glamour magazine, and he was really successful in those positions.
Okay, I have a question about this.
Uh-huh.
Okay, going back to his college time, right?
Mm-hmm.
He does that summer school thing, and then he has to draw just what other people want to see. Like, he figures out that if he wants to make it through this, he just has to give them what they want, as opposed to giving them what he feels inside of himself, right? The true Andy art or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a lesson of college that is, it's easy to be cynical about, but it's kind of important, is that sometimes you have a job and you just need to give the people what they want.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to do it. So when you're like, he's in marketing, I'm like, an artist going to marketing? But like, if you learn that lesson, like, you just need to give people what they want.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Then he would be successful.
And it's funny because he does that. He sort of like flip-flops back and forth between that, where he's like doing very commercial art that he knows is gonna sell, and then doing his very like controversial stuff that isn't gonna sell, but he's more passionate about it.
Yeah.
And he goes back and forth his whole career. So he, learns that lesson in college. And like also after that, he started being very successful in college. Like in these harder upper level classes, he was getting all A's and doing really, really well.
Yeah.
So he clearly like figured out how to play the game.
Yeah.
And then got hired at these magazines and was doing really well. He was a very successful artist. He won a bunch of awards, and he was really well acclaimed for they called it his whimsical style. And he had like a blotted line technique and he used rubber stamps to kind of create his own unique drawings with them. Which these were all techniques that he learned in college and then sort of elevated and refined as he got into the art scene. And he got so successful that he was able to branch out, and he could start pursuing his own art career. And this is sort of when he started creating these really famous pop art pieces. And so the idea behind pop art, which is it's all about kind of flipping the idea of what traditional art and culture is. So instead of it being this like highly acclaimed, like kind of snobbish idea, pop artists kind of wanted to make it into something that was very like commercial and accessible by the average person and relatable by the average person. And so they took these sort of very commercial, very like recognizable imagery like Campbell's soup and like road signs and comic books and that kind of stuff, and they made it into this fine art. So it's sort of a commentary on this idea that like being commercial was not good, but also was like fine art kind of thing, if that makes any sense. Like multiple commentaries happening there. It just like blurred the line between like high and low art cultures is what it was attempting to do. And so
what was the commentary that high art was really commercial art, like, and they put on airs, but why not be honest and make it accessible? Or like, what was he trying to say?
I think the main idea was that the idea of high and low art cultures was like unnecessary, superfluous, and that like high art was just as like trashy as this like quote unquote low art, and like low art could be elevated into this high art position, quote unquote. And so instead of saying like, oh, that's not art, that's, a commercial product, then, you take this product that's commercial and you turn it into art. And so you're saying, no, all of this is art because it's art, and all of this is, and like nothing is art kind of thing. It sort of also is confusing because it gets its root from like this Dadaist kind of art style, which is very much so against, it's like anything is art or nothing is art kind of thing. So, and like one of Andy Warhol's like favorite artists or art inspiration or people he was inspired by was, oh man, his name was right here. I really like him. Salvador Dali. And he has, those like melting clocks, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So again, this sort of idea of like surrealism, it's kind of rejecting this, the logic and reason behind like modern capitalism and, just the expression of this sort of like crazy nonsense is just as valuable as what this high-end art that like only wealthy people had access to was.
Interesting.
So if you followed any of that.
Well, maybe Dali just hated clocks. It's like freaking melty clocks.
I think that this is probably a topic that I struggle a little bit with, because I would consider myself to be a low art person. Like I like what I like, and it's not necessarily maybe super thought-provoking, or I don't know, like, so I struggle to understand, I guess, how this bridged anything, because as a low art person, I appreciate like a scene that my grandma painted of some cows, but when somebody like splatters crap on a toilet and calls it art, like I'm just like, I don't get it.
I think that's the point. Like, that's the comment, is that, like, a lot of times this, like, quote-unquote high-end art is sort of just as silly and ridiculous as you know, this quote-unquote low-end art. And so the idea of classifying art as high and low-end in and of itself is a wrong thing to do, because art is something that is very subjective, and so you're allowed to like what you like and have that be just as valuable to you as, you know, something else that somebody likes that is entirely different. And so classifying art as high and low end is sort of contrary to what the heart of art is, which is to sort of enrich the soul of a person, the community. It kind of captures those emotions and things that we maybe can't express or feel in other mediums. And so art provides that, and on every level, and so it's all valid, if maybe that makes sense. There's nothing wrong with your field of cows.
Yeah, I love my field of cows that was given to my uncle.
How did you end up with it?
I didn't. I don't have it. It's his.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
We're going to do... Our next one is a real life art heist. We're gonna steal that field of cows.
I don't know.
So it feels like maybe the point is that Andy Warhol was non-judgmental when it comes to art taste, as in like you can like what you like, and if Andy Warhol, famous artist, came into your house and you were like, oh, check out this cow painting that I stole from my uncle that's on my wall now, he would be like, oh, good for you.
Yeah. So actually, like, he is, like, he's said to be very supportive of, like, generally people that are unsupported. So, like, women and minorities. And he was, like, part of the gay scene. And so he was very supportive of that, obviously, because he was part of it. And like feminism, because that was also something that was happening at the time. I mean, it's still happening, I guess. It's all happening. But, you know, he was very like accepting of all of these people and these different viewpoints and these different ideas. And was like well known for being like open-minded and kind in those respects, right?
Isn't it weird that you usually think of like a tortured artist, but Andy Warhol had like, his mom told him he was great and he could be whatever he wants, and his brothers loved him, and his dad gave him all his money when he died. Like, there's the typical tortured artist, like, I come from a broken home. And Andy Warhol is like, no,
I did okay.
Everybody loved me.
Yeah, well, and he was like, it's funny because he was like, once he figured out like that he didn't have to try and perform for people or be what people wanted, and was starting to sort of just act himself and be confident in himself, he started to be more and more liked, like in school, because he was like, for a little while he was bullied and stuff because he was so he projected so feminine, and he had the blotchy skin and was fairly sickly and thin and pale, kind of everything that was not expected of men or boys at the time. And so, you know, but once he started you know, recognizing that he could be himself fully, and was almost like a class clown in some places, that he started to kind of be like reciprocate with that, like people would reciprocate in kind. So yeah, and he definitely became very like famous, very well liked, and so during this time, like 1962 is when he exhibited his Campbell's Soup paintings, and they became wildly famous. And I didn't say this earlier. It's 20 inches by 16 inches high is each canvas, and there's 32 of them. So 8 columns of 4 panels.
All of soup?
All the same can of soup. Yeah. So it's just Because like,
and you said this was like screen printing or something.
Yeah,
right?
so yeah, silk screening is I think what it's called when it's a fine art. Screen printing is like what they call it when you put it on a shirt. Same thing, but it's like you can put like an emulsion on a screen, and then
what is an emulsion?
So it's a light sensitive, like very kind of thick liquid that you can put on there, and then once it dries, if you put a dark thing over it and then expose the whole thing to light, whatever is dark, the emulsion stays soft, and then whatever is hit by the light gets hard. And then you use, like a pressure washer or whatever, and you wash away the soft stuff, and then you're left with this image. Huh. And the emulsion blocks anything going through the screen.
It's like exposed aggregate for concrete.
Ah.
I didn't know that. But yeah, and so then you can, and then the really nice thing about that is you can print thousands of the same thing.
Yeah.
And you can print it or create different screens of different layers of color. So you can do a bunch of different colors and kind of create, that's how they do printing. You have, this layer's yellow, this layer's blue, this layer's, magenta, and it creates the colors that way. And so he silk screened these. So it's the same can, just 32 of them, and it just was like wildly famous. It was super well received. And he started doing portraits. He's really famous for his portraiture as well. And so he did Marilyn Monroe, and he did the same kind of style, like silk screen, but he used like, pinks and lavenders. I actually saw one of his originals of the Marilyn Monroe where he used diamond dust on it. And I got to be like my nose was right up on it because we got to go back into a back room. I also saw The Great Wave by Hokusai and some prints from Albrecht Dürer, and it was lovely to see Andy Warhol's, but like I cried when I saw the Hokusai and the Albrecht Dürer, like the originals. Oh my gosh, they were so beautiful.
This Andy Warhol
was there too.
Is taking a strange turn. He's great, but have you heard of Hokusai?
Have you heard of these guys? But that's just they're more my aesthetic than Andy Warhol's are. But it was like cool to see because it was an original of his.
So like the Marilyn Monroe one, is that like you would take a picture and then use that like a tracing or whatever to create the stencil or the pattern for the...
Yeah, so he would take the picture and use like, some of them almost look like negatives. And then he would print that. And so he manipulated, because he did his own photography. Yeah. And he would manipulate it and then create a screen with it and then silk screen with him and do like layers. He even did some where it's like slightly offset, which normally you would want to not do, but he slightly offset it so that the colors, it almost looks like, 3D film where the red and the blue are off from each other. So he has stuff like that. But he also did like Mick Jagger and Elvis and lots of famous people. And the Elvis one actually resold in 2008 for $100 million. Woof.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It'll buy you a lot of tomato soup.
Yeah, it absolutely would. So from all of that success, in 1964, he opened his art studio, The Factory, and it became like the hotbed of crazy stuff that he did. Because at this point, he's become like really well known, really famous. He's making a lot of money. And so he's starting to do kind of more crazy stuff. And he started filming films, and he did... Okay, so like the first one he did in 1963 is called Sleep. And it's like a 5.5 hour film of him just recording his boyfriend sleeping. And that's it. It's like nothing. And then in 65, he recorded one called Empire. And it is 8 hours long. I looked it up on YouTube also. I didn't watch the whole thing, obviously, because it's crazy boring. Because all it is it's filmed from the nearby Lifetime building out the window. And it's just the Empire State Building. And it's just that. And like as the day goes by and the lights turn on, like the camera doesn't move, like nothing happens. And it's 8 hours long. And he's like, bam.
How do you know something didn't happen in the last 5 minutes?
You know what? It's true. Maybe it had a real good payoff, but there's no way.
King Kong is climbing up at the last minute. He really builds the tension.
Yeah. But he also started doing what?
What's the point of these?
He was so advanced in art, I guess, that I have no idea, because I don't know. There was things, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Art critics talk about it, and I didn't even have the patience to read what the art critics said about it. I was like, boring.
Do you think there's some things where like you look out a window or whatever, or you're in a place and you're like, I could stay here forever. Do you think that was him of like, I could sit here and look out this window forever. I could gaze upon my sleeping boyfriend forever, you know?
Why don't you just take a picture, though?
Maybe, yeah. A picture would capture it just as well, I would think. Like, I have a hard time hearing about these things of art and not thinking, like, he's got to be just, like, laughing. And, you know, like, if I just set this camera up and walk away and come back 8 hours later, these idiots are going to eat it up.
He, like, forgot that he did it.
You know, I don't know. I feel like there must be an intent there. Without intent, it's just stupid.
Yeah.
But I don't know what his intent is, so it's just stupid.
Yeah, I don't know. But he did a lot of things where I don't know his intent either, because he filmed a lot of really, really explicit stuff, like orgies and like lots of sex related things, and he did like photography of it and videos and all that kind of stuff, so much so that the cops had stopped him multiple times because of how obscene what he was doing in his factory was. And like he used, you know, gross materials on artworks and stuff, so it was like sometimes he seems like this really good guy, and then like it swings and he's like heavy into drugs and heavy into like, you know, this really explicit stuff. And that's sort of where he gets into trouble, I think. Surprise, surprise.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Yeah. Or any like explicit filming. So during this time, he is, you know, meeting just kind of lots of crazy stuff. And he meets Valerie Solanas. And she is kind of a local eccentric lady. And she founded a group called SCUM, which stands for Society for Cutting Up Men. She was the founder and the sole member. And she wrote a manifesto called the Scum Manifesto. And historically, I feel like people that write manifestos, it's not a good sign.
If you call something a manifesto,
like,
you're
no
already
good.
on shaky ground.
Yeah. Like the only manifestos I can think of are the ones like by the Unabomber and like, what is it, Manson? Did he do a manifesto?
Probably.
Anyways, like not good.
I would love that if like someone's in there typing on something. They're like, what are you working on there? It's a novel. Oh, okay. Come back a few hours later. It's become a manifesto. Oh, no.
Ruh-roh. So yeah, she wrote this, and people assumed that she was suffering from some sort of acute mental disorder because she was like fairly unhinged frequently. But that's like just the kind of people that Andy Warhol hung out with. And so in the mid 60s, she was like supporting herself by begging and doing sex work, but also writing manifestos. And she wrote some, other than her Scum Manifesto, she wrote some short stories, and she also wrote a screenplay called Up Your Butt. But they used a different word for butt.
Oh, but this is a family podcast.
But this is
Was it the Donkadonk?
Close, but 3 letters instead
Hold
of
on.
that many.
We got to go back to the Society for Cutting Up Men.
I mean,
What is the purpose?
I
What
think
did her manifesto say?
it's
The
to
name.
cut up men, I guess.
Yeah.
Is
So
it
she was
what it says on
she
the
was
tin?
like considered a radical feminist.
Yeah.
And so the manifesto is basically saying that men are obsolete. They don't need to be here. Women have found a way to procreate on their own, and we should create a society that has no men.
They have?
That's what she said.
Oh, that's what she said. Good one.
That's your catchphrase now. No one's ever used that one before.
But like so sincerely said. Like I didn't mean it as a joke. But she literally, that's like what it's about.
Okay.
So she wrote this, you know, all of this stuff, and she was really passionate about it. And Andy Warhol is really famous in the area. And so she went to the factory and asked him to produce her screenplay. And so Andy took a look at it, and he was like, "This is really well typed. I'll review it.
Well typed.
Like literally, that's what he's quoted as saying. It's really well typed. I'll review it.
He was like, "Put 6 more hours in it, and then you got a deal." And at least 2 more orgies.
Yeah, at least. Well, he read it, and it was so explicit that he thought maybe it was from the police as a sting, like a setup for him. And so when she came back to ask him what he thought and if he was going to produce it, he was like, "I lost it." And some people think that he lost it on purpose because it was so explicit and he thought it was a setup and he didn't want to get caught, so he just got rid of it. Or like he actually did lose it potentially. But anyways, he told her that he lost it, and she got super mad, and she demanded that he pay her for it. And so instead, he jokingly offered her a job as a typist for him because she had done such a good job typing it up. But then he offered her $25 and a role in his sexploitation film called I, a Man. And she took that and was in the film. And so she played in the film, and later she got really mad because she felt like he had changed some of her dialogue in the film and like cut a bunch of her out of it, and she was really mad about it. And so she just was like really had this beef with Warhol over the whole thing. So on June 3rd, 1968, Solanas was kind of hitting the streets, going to different producers, trying to get her screenplay produced. Because she had another copy. I think she had a few copies. Because she went to a bunch of different producers. And she just got rejected over and over and over again. And then she went to producer Margot Feiden. And she went to her residence, like her home. And she spoke with her for 4 hours, trying to convince her to produce the movie. And Feiden wanted nothing to do with it. And so when she continued to refuse, Solanas got super mad. And this is her quote. What she's quoted as saying is she said, "Yes, you will produce the play because I'll shoot Andy Warhol and that will make me famous and the play famous. And then you'll produce it." And then she left. And she like had pulled out a gun and showed the gun to Feiden. And so Feiden called her local police precinct. She called Andy Warhol's precinct. She called the police headquarters in Lower Manhattan and the offices of Mayor John Lindsay and Governor Nelson Rockefeller, to report what happened and try and stop the assassination attempt.
But did she call Andy Warhol?
I don't know if she could get a hold of him. I don't know if that's why she didn't. Like, I have no idea. But those are the people it's reported she called.
Okay, this is so dumb, but there is a SNL bit where Charles Barkley is a contestant on a dating show, and the joke is that the girl keeps asking him questions, and she's like, "Why do you think I'll date you?" And he's like, "'Cause if you don't, I'll kill myself."
And this is her tactic a little bit.
Yeah, and now this is what she did, where she was like, "I'll go kill somebody."
Yeah, if you don't produce it, I'm going to kill somebody. And so she called the police, and the police did not respond well. Some of them are quoted as saying, "You can't arrest someone because you believe she's going to kill Andy Warhol." And then another one said, "Look, lady, how would you even know what a real gun looks like?" And so nobody took it seriously. So she left, and Solanas left and was not detained or sought, or Andy wasn't warned or anything. And so she went to Warhol's studio because obviously she knew where it was. And she waited around for a while. And Morrissey, he's the guy that worked there with Andy. Morrissey tried to tell her that Warhol wasn't coming in that day, and that she should leave. And she was like, nah, I'll wait. And so eventually Warhol did show up, and he had his friend Fred Hughes there. And then waiting in the factory was an art critic, Mario Amaya. So those are kind of all the people that were there. And so when they showed up, they all rode the elevator up together into the factory or into the studio. And Warhol was noted as complimenting how she looked that day because she was actually wearing makeup and had like a nice like dress on, which normally she didn't have makeup on and didn't like dress nicely, I guess. So then they chatted for like all of them chatted for a while, and Morrissey and Hughes went into a couple different rooms. So it was just Amaya and Warhol and Solanas that were left in that main room. And so the phone rang. Andy turned around to grab the phone, and she just opened fire. And she missed the first couple shots, and then the third hit him. And then she fired at Amaya, who like fell to the floor, and he was grazed, but he wasn't severely injured. And then so this is where Fred Hughes tells two different stories. So I'm going to go with I think the first one is more true. So the first one he tells is that he was in the other room and he heard the like pops from the gun, and then she came to try and open the door. So she had like hit the call button for the elevator and then went to go get Fred Hughes, but he held the door shut so she couldn't get the door open. And so she just, when the elevator came up, she left. A second version that he tells to like the media later, so this is the like dramatic version that I do not think is true. He says that he was next to the elevator. He wasn't in another room. He said he was in the room with them, and that she had the gun to his head and was threatening to shoot him, and that the elevator magically appeared. And he was like, there's the elevator, you should get on it. And she's like, okay. And like gets on the elevator and leaves, instead of like shooting him in the head. So I think it's probably the first one that's more accurate. Because then after she goes down the elevator, Hughes comes out and sees Andy on the floor just in a pool of blood, and calls the cops and for an ambulance. And then he kind of checks on the other guy. The other guy is not hurt very severely. And then the Morrissey also, I think he was actually in the bathroom, I think is what he said. He was like off in the bathroom. And he came out and found Andy in just like, they just kept saying it was so much blood. And so they call the cops and the ambulance. And shortly after the shooting, because Solanas just walks out of the place, leaving them kind of in that condition. So shortly after all of that, she like goes and takes her makeup off, changes into like a beige kind of nondescript outfit, and then turns herself into the police saying, I am a flower child. He had too much control over my life. And that's like what she said when she turned herself in.
I thought for sure she was going to return to the producer and go,
Deed is done.
I did it. Let's talk details.
No, I like somewhere else she said, like I saw quoted that she was like, I suppose you're looking for me. And the police are like, who are you? Here's what is like back to the injuries, I guess. Here's what's crazy. I did not realize that ambulances were really wild in back in the day. So they called the ambulance, and it took 20 minutes for the ambulance to get there. They were like a block and a half away from the hospital. So it took 20 minutes for the ambulance to get there. And they're 6 floors up. And the medical staff came in, and they saw him, and they're like, we don't know how to fix any of this. So they didn't do anything to help him. And instead of taking him down the elevator, they carried him down 6 flights of stairs. What? And then when they got in the ambulance driver refused to turn on the siren unless they paid him $15. What? It's just so wild to me. Did
they pay the $15?
They did, yeah.
Good call.
Yeah. They paid the dollars, and they got to the hospital, which was a block and a half away.
It's like the same thing as when you Uber or do a Grubhub or whatever, and you have to pay for premium delivery,
Yeah.
Where they don't drop off everyone else's food first.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing. It's a tale as old as time.
Yeah. I'm sure that Andy felt that way. He's like, this will be just like when they deliver food.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he got to the hospital, and they actually thought that he was already dead. Like, he'd lost so much... I almost said vital liquids. A little Dr. Strangelove quote there. But they thought he was dead, and then this doctor that was supposed to be off duty but had been called in or something saw him and was like, no, this guy's not dead. Let me handle
Let me
this.
clear that up for you, gentlemen.
Yeah.
And well, he started off pretty pale, right? So,
yeah, he was already a pretty pale guy. And so they took him in, and so the bullet, so he was only hit by one bullet, but the bullet pierced his lung, spleen, liver, esophagus, and stomach. Like, it really traveled.
Did she shoot him down the mouth or something?
I have no idea.
Bounced around.
Yeah,
maybe?
it moved around. And so the surgery was actually really complex because the surgeon kept having to cut in to try and find where all this blood was coming from because there was so much blood. And so he would just kind of cut and see if there was damage. And so after the surgery, he had huge Frankenstein-style scars all over him because the doctor was like, I'm just going to save this guy's life because he might, this is the only way I know how to do it. And so they just cut in to find where stuff was. And it did work. It saved his life. And he would show off those scars for a really long time. For the rest of his life, really. But when they were at the hospital, so a bunch of art people, his art friends showed up, and his mom was there. And she was so hysterical that they had to sedate her. And then his art friends started doing art stuff in the lobby, and much to the media's pleasure, making a scene out of it, And
with his blood.
I mean, they could have.
They were like, we got a lot of it here. We got to do something.
Yeah,
don't waste
that material. And it wouldn't surprise me because they did that kind of stuff anyways. They used human fluids in art, so I wouldn't put it past them. But after the surgery, he pulled through, and he was in the hospital for 8 weeks recovering before he got released. But after 8 weeks, he was released. The other guy, Amaya, he patched up and checked out after a few hours, same day kind of thing. So yeah, there's that. And then we go to the trial because she obviously turned herself in, and she was evaluated, and declared mentally unstable. And so she was transferred to Elmhurst Hospital. So this is Solanas, obviously. Yeah. Before she went to court. And then in June 28th, she was indicted on charges of attempted murder and assault and illegal possession of a firearm. But during that trial, she was declared incompetent. And in August, she was sent to a state hospital for the criminally insane. And that same month that she was sent to the criminally insane state hospital, her scum manifesto was published because she had become famous from trying to assassinate Warhol.
But the movie did not get made.
No, it did not. The scum manifesto did, however, get published. But then in January 1969, she underwent another psychiatric evaluation, and she was officially diagnosed with chronic paranoid schizophrenia. But the following June, she was deemed fit to stand trial. So she actually did stand trial. And in the trial, she decided to represent herself. So she had no attorney assisting her in any way, and she just pleaded guilty to reckless assault with intent to harm. And she was sentenced to 3 years in prison with 1 year time served.
Yeah.
And she went to the New York State Prison for Women and stayed there till 1971 when she was released. But what's crazy is after she was released, like nobody kept tabs on her, and she stalked Andy Warhol. Like she would like harass him with phone calls, and she got arrested various times and then would get released, and then she would stalk him again, and she would get arrested until eventually she was institutionalized, and then she would get released from that, and then she would get institutionalized again, and then she would go and be homeless for a little while. And during this time, she always still found time to write. So way, way late in her life, she was continuing to write more manifestos. And in 1988, she died from pneumonia. And the gentleman that found her, there was like pages and pages of typewritten stuff around her. And he didn't read it because he didn't want to be near her corpse. And then her mother, when she buried her, she buried all of her belongings with her, including that secret manifesto. So nobody knows what it's about.
That's so mysterious.
So mysterious. I don't think anybody cares. I was like, I'm okay keeping it secret. I think she seemed unhinged. But that's sort of like how her story ended, as far as like, you know, she did kind of get a little famous for doing it. Mm-hmm. But ultimately she was really just mentally unwell, and that didn't go well for her. I don't think she had any kind of actual support.
Yeah.
In any way. But after the assassination attempt, things kind of changed hugely for Andy Warhol. So reporters stated that this was sort of a time where you saw the end of his previous life and the beginning of his next life, because the assassination attempt changed him, like how he approached art and life, but also like physically he dealt with stuff for the rest of his life because of it. So he started to kind of distance himself from these like disreputable people. He started hanging out with, you know, more reputable people.
Makes sense.
And he sort of went back to a lot of his like silk screening stuff. He ended up doing more portraits. He even did a portrait for Dolly Parton, which I thought was fantastic. And he traveled a great deal. He wrote a book. He opened another studio. He couldn't help himself from still doing really edgy stuff. So he still did like very explicit nude photography and that kind of stuff. But he wasn't so much into the wild stuff that he did. And part of that was probably because he was in constant pain all the time from surviving the assassination attempt. And he had to wear like a girdle just to like keep his insides in place. He had sort of like during this time he had sort of a resurgence in the 80s where he was kind of famous again. He did a bunch of traveling. He wrote that book and all that kind of stuff. But then he had this reoccurring gallbladder issue, and he had this intense fear of hospitals. So he really, really did not want to go. And so he pushed it off until finally he had to go and address it. And he went and went to the hospital, had surgery. They removed it. And the hospital was like, this is a routine surgery. You'll be fine. And then he started to recover. But then a few days after that, he suffered a sudden cardiac arrest while he slept. And so on February 22nd, 1987, he passed away at the age of 58 from complications from the surgery. Which, like, later when doctors looked over his stuff, they were like, this was actually not super routine because of his age and because of the condition that his health physically was in, that it turned out to be a fairly high-risk surgery.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that is Andy Warhol and the assassination attempt on his life, which, like, really kind of like long con style ended up causing his death because it caused so many health issues for so long.
So he probably would not recommend being assassinated.
Yeah, no, probably not. Probably not.
2 out of 5 stars.
2 out of 5. Still gets some stars. Yeah. So I just thought, like, it's so interesting because I think so many times we forget the person behind the art, or we sort of take these, because he was like such a stereotype. Like he wore like the black turtleneck and he had sunglasses and he had like a platinum blonde wig he would wear, and he would be so aloof, like acting in these interviews where he would go have interviews, and you can like find him on YouTube. And I didn't, because apparently they're very awkward, and so I didn't want to feel awkward watching them. But he like will just put 2 fingers to his lips and just be like, and then just like silent all the rest of the time, just like not say anything. And so he did sort of like put out this persona of like this kind of eccentric artist and that kind of stuff. But there's so much, like so many layers to, we just kind of forget that these like famous people are people and have all this crazy stuff going on.
Okay. How many other artists, like contemporary artists or even older ones, achieve that kind of success in their lifetimes? I feel like it's fairly rare.
There's actually quite a few. Pablo Picasso was super famous in his time.
I knew you were gonna say him.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I hate Picasso.
I know you do.
Why do you hate Picasso?
Because I am a low art idiot. And so when I feel like these artists, like they pay their dues, like Andy did, like Picasso does, that like they show that they have talent, and then they go do crap. And because everyone knows that they have talent, they applaud it.
Yeah.
And I just feel like they are tricking the world. And Picasso was just like so full of himself, and he like doodled this crap, and everyone would gush over it. And I'm just like, you don't deserve this.
Maybe I'll have to do an episode about Picasso. Just
that would be a really fun one.
Yeah. I'll see what I can do. But
that's Arts and Crimes, and Brandon's like, his art is a crime.
The crime is I hate him.
Yeah, it's true. But like not just like more modern artists, like, you know, older Renaissance style artists also, like Caravaggio was really, really famous, but also a very controversial guy. I should do an episode about him. He's fantastic. He's one of my favorites.
Talked about him.
Yeah. And Michelangelo was hugely famous. Raphael was really famous, and he was like a party boy. Like Michelangelo and Raphael actually hated each other.
Yeah, actually, so Raphael was rude but cool, and Michelangelo was the partying one.
Well, historically incorrect.
But Ninja Turtle-y.
Very correct. Yeah. So like those guys, they often were very famous and well known. I think that, you know, there's enough of a mix, because like Van Gogh was not famous at all till well after he was dead. So there's just like a mix, but there are quite a few that are famous in their lifetime. It's a big, cool, hip scene.
Do you think his marketing background contributed to that?
Oh, I'm sure, because he knew how to market. And
so
he
like
knew what
the turtleneck and the wig and all that was kind of
I'm sure that it was all a facade.
Ploy.
Yeah. Because like when people spoke of him that were like his friends, they were like, he is warm, he's compassionate, he is kind, he's incredibly intelligent. But the view of the like average consumer that is only knowing him through what he presents was that he was not an intelligent guy, that he was very aloof, that he was sort of cold and eccentric. So it was a very different person presented very frequently to the people. Yeah. So the moral of the story is you can't trust the media. Whatever's on Instagram isn't real.
Yeah, that's true.
My students need to know that.
You should go read The Presentation of the Self in Everyday Life. Some good light reading for you. That is actually a fantastic book.
Yeah.
The other funny, I think there is like a lesson kind of from this, which is that idea. This has come up multiple times. People I work with have asked me. Some people on social media have asked, like, should you do a job where you can make money, or should you do something you're passionate about, right? And I think like a lot of artists, right, show that like you give the people what they want to secure the paycheck, and then you have more freedom to experiment and do what you want, right? Mm-hmm. And it seems like Warhol bounced back and forth. Like he'd be running low on funds, and he's like, all right, I better put out some more silk screen prints or whatever, you know?
Yeah, it's true.
And like that's a lesson for everyday life. Like it's the same, you know. I like to write and do fantastic podcasts all the time, right? But I can't finance my life with that, so I have a day job.
Yeah, that's why I teach. I need the big bucks.
Yeah, as a teacher.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you guys for going through that journey with me. And thank you, listeners, for listening and learning from Andy Warhol. Bye. You guys can say bye, too.
Oh, goodbye.
Can I stop recording, or do you guys have anything else funny to say?
No.
You got to end with a lecture.
What? Okay.
Talk about how Andy Warhol is great and Picasso can suck it.
Okay. So, Andy Warhol is pretty great. I mean, is So
why are you even saying?
Anyway, his soup cans make me feel things.